Swiss champ repeat occurred. Invitational spot competition stirred. And diplomacy musical group spurred. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, October 2021. For our feature story, cliques of players who tend to work with each other in a series of games to the exclusion of others have been a topic of conversation in the diplomacy hobby ever since its inception in the 1960s. What is the appropriate line to draw between the proper evaluation of player potential based on past experience versus the improper conduct of cross-gaming to make deals spanning across more than one game? We'll tackle this thorny question later in the program with a panel of experienced diplomacy players from across the face-to-face, virtual face-to-face, and online communities. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. The Swiss Diplomacy Championship for 2021 was held face-to-face in Ervidon-les-Bains over the last weekend in September, with Christophe Bourget winning for the unbelievable fourth time. The other finishers of the top seven, which include many names you would have heard me mispronounce last month in my report on the Anjou Fire Tournament, were Michael Anisian, Nicolas Sali, Brioc Thibault, Steve Personini, Pierre-Yves Franzetti, and Andre Almeida. The event included an opening reception, 3 rounds of diplomacy, a sit-down dinner, and open gaming. Christophe was already in the 26th position in the DBN Invitational standings before factoring in this win, so he will certainly increase his chances of an invite to diplomacy's big dance with the points awarded as Swiss champ. Speaking of the DBNI, competition for the 28 available spots has been hot and heavy throughout the season, but has become particularly acute this fall. If you have not already watched the September episode of Countdown on this very Diplomacy Broadcast Network, a link to that video can be found below. As of the time of this broadcast, 4 of those 28 spots have been taken by automatic qualifiers, representing winners of this year's Whipping Tournament, Dixicon Tournament, Summer Classic event, and French Championships. Those are Jason Masbaum, Karthik Conith, Saren Kwok, and Cyril Sevon. Additional automatic bids may be awarded as this year's DBNI qualifying season comes to a close in January. This will be based upon attendance numbers at those remaining events, leagues, and tournaments. Rounding out the rest of the top 10 qualifiers as of now are Ed Sullivan, Katie Gray, Matthew Krill, Farron Jane, Russ Dennis, and Mikarlis Kamarites. The contest, though, is very fluid at this point, so it's not too late for you to get to that February DBNI virtual face-to-face tournament. You just need to play in remaining league games and attend face-to-face and virtual face-to-face events. Speaking of face-to-face events, the first such tournament to be held in North America since the pandemic will be Carnage, taking place November 5th through 7th in Mount Snow, Vermont. This will also constitute the 2021 North American Diplomacy Championships, the DIPCON. Let's hear about all of this exciting upcoming weekend of diplomacy details with tournament director David Maletsky. Hello, David Maletsky, and welcome to Deadline.
Thank you.
You are a well-known name in the diplomacy hobby. Tell us how you got into it to begin with, just briefly.
I was in grad school in Nebraska, and a long-standing friend of mine was going to attend a regatta, which was a big tournament for a huge diplomacy club in Denver run by Manus Hand. And so it wasn't that far of a drive to Colorado, so I went out there and then made some new friends and got yelled at and thought I'd come back for more.
That seems par for the course.
Yeah.
Well, we're here to talk about the Carnage tournament coming up in November, which this year is also a couple of things. It's the first face-to-face event in North America in a long time. and is also the DipCon for 2021. So tell us a little bit about the event, if you would, overall, and then a little bit more about the diplomacy tournament itself.
Well, it's a big gaming convention along the lines of what a lot of people would be familiar with, like a WBC or a Origins, a Gen Con. But the difference with Carnage is that it's always been run not for profit. The organizers are all volunteers. It started out at a much smaller venue in, I believe, a Scutney, Vermont, on top of a mountain, and then moved to a bigger resort in Lake Moray. Finally moved to a much bigger one in Killington, and now we're at Mount Snow at a huge resort. It's very affordable as travel and lodging go. And it's been run for a long, long time. The organizers are very generous to our diplomacy event. They provide special badge most years. It slipped their minds this year because of the COVID and the rush to get everything done. But they're still going to give us a bunch of awards, and it's always been a good time.
Well, the diplomacy tournament itself, I understand, is more of a Friday, Saturday event. Could you tell us a little bit about the specific dates and what the round times are?
So it's always held the first full weekend in November. I have always, I believe always, but for many years at least, when I've run tournaments, I've always run a Friday, Saturday, Saturday schedule, because probably the only downside of Carnage is that it's not immediately upon an airport. So, in order to allow travelers to get home in a reasonable hour on Sunday, we typically don't run anything on Sunday other than a small award ceremony in the morning. Um, so the round times I'm completely unprepared for, but I can.
Well, while you're looking that up, October 5th would be the Friday. I'm sorry, November 5th would be the Friday, November 6th, the Saturday. And as I understand it, if you're coming in Thursday night, which is the 4th of November, there is a dinner for hobbyists that night. But the diplomacy
Yeah.
tournament itself starts on Friday.
Yep. So we always encourage people to get in on Thursday, because that way they have the diplomacy schedule with all time unlimited rounds can be very hectic. So in order to avail themselves of the considerable facilities, the hot tub, the heated outdoor pool, spa, sauna, what have you, we encourage people to get in Thursday so that they can spend the day Friday socializing, hanging out, playing other games, whatever. So, as you said, this November 4th at 7 p.m., we're going to be having a communal dinner. Robert Roos has already uh, scouted out a venue that I have to talk to, but it sounded and looked good from the information I have. On the 5th, that Friday, the first round is at 6 p.m. On Saturday, the rounds start at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m., and then there's an award ceremony at 10 a.m. Sunday.
Is it a situation where it's your best 2 out of 3 rounds, or do all 3 rounds count? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in keeping with the convention name, it's all 3 rounds count. They're all time unlimited, and under the scoring system we use, solo victory is weighted prohibitively highly. So the structure encourages players to spend a long time going for it if necessary, although it also permits more casual players to contentedly call games early if that's what they want to be doing.
Dave, tell us a little bit about what protocols you have in place for COVID for this year's event.
So initially, the Carnage staff didn't want to expose their volunteers to abuse, and as a consequence, their initial position, in keeping with guidance from the state of Vermont, was going to be anybody could show up freely. But now they have again, under guidance from the state of Vermont. They're only going to allow you into the convention if you can either provide proof of a being fully vaccinated, or proof of having had a clear COVID test in the past 2 days. Furthermore, they have allowed the GMs of individual events to set their own additional protocols. So even though there's been some grumbling, my sister is a doctor, and I asked her straight up what I should be doing, and she told me I should be having everyone be masked while they're playing the game in close quarters. So that's what we're going to be doing. There will be extreme zero tolerance penalties for someone taking off their mask, or even worse, if someone takes someone else's mask off, they'll be banned from the event, and possibly worse. So beyond that, people are still going to be free to be mask free outside the play area. So that's what we're doing, and it's on the advice of not just an MD, but an MD I happen to trust implicitly because she's my sister.
I understand. Well, I'm sure we'll all be safe and be happy that we're and secure that we're under those kind of protocols. Give us a final pitch, Dave, on why folks should come to this event. They haven't planned on coming. They're watching this episode and say, "Well, gosh, maybe I'm thinking about coming." What would you say to tip them over that edge to get them to come?
Well, there's a lot of things. The venue is a ski resort and has, like as I said, all sorts of wonderful facilities. It's very affordable as travel goes, but and the diplomacy will be a structure that I think a lot of the virtual players will largely be unfamiliar with, or players that haven't even played virtually. If you're primarily an online player, you assuredly haven't played under this structure. But all those things aside, I think the main reason to come, just like any other face-to-face event, is the people. And there's going to be a lot of, I would say, virtual face-to-face luminaries present, that players will be familiar with from these DBN broadcasts, and having played in the past 2 years in the newly created virtual medium. So mostly, I think the primary reason is to come hang out with people you're familiar with and meet new people. And, the hobby, in my vision and the vision of many others, has always been about the people. And I don't think that's likely to change.
Well, I appreciate that, Dave. I will be there, and I'm
Yep.
looking forward to seeing you there. I'm looking forward to see you all there. And if you're watching this episode, I'm going to be there. You should too. Another way to achieve DB&I points is to participate in league play, including both the Virtual Diplomacy League and the Tour of Britain. The Tour of Britain concludes its 4-weekend event with games to be played on November 27th and 28th. All of these league games take place on the VWDC Discord server, an invite to which is listed below in case you have not yet taken that plunge. Did you know there was a musical group actually called Diplomacy? Actor Jack Falahy, who starred in ABC's How to Get Away with Murder, and well-known DJ and producer Elefante were childhood friends. But it was while they were participating in a series of diplomacy house games that they decided to form a band, which they called Diplomacy. One article in the music industry press describes their collaboration by first outlining the game that launched the duo. Here's what they said. The board game Diplomacy requires tactful moves, concentration, negotiation, and at times, partnership. It's a game where one can't do things halfway. As soon as you decide to play, you're all in, consumed by wherever the game's story will take you that day. World domination is the goal. You just have to figure out how to get there. Amen, brother. A link to the video for the single from the Diplomacy group, which is called Silver Lake Queen, can be found below. Now, Let's take a trip around the various websites and YouTube channels for the content providers, which we call our DBN media partners. The weekly newsletter Diplomacy Briefing continues to provide breaking news, tournament and league schedules, as well as diplomacy articles for the benefit of our hobby every single Friday. Recent issues have included articles from Christian Brown about coming in second at Weaselmoot, Alex Lebedev explaining his recent win of the European Diplomacy Championship, and we had a reprint of a classic Eddie Brisson article from decades ago about the Baltic opening for Germany. Amby and Kaner just released their latest Diplomacy Games podcast, featuring discussion of their many ongoing games online of diplomacy variants, such as Spice Islands, Europa Renovatio, and a new Middle Earth variant, which appears on the recently released diplomacy app called Primacy. And then Dave Ainsworth makes a guest appearance on the blog of Brother Board, having authored an interesting piece about whether the diplomacy map itself is woefully unbalanced. You can find links to all of this exciting DIP content at the media page of the NADF.org, or you can visit links found in the description field below. Nexus News is now a staple here on Deadline, and this episode will be no exception. To bring us all up to speed on goings-on at the popular Nexus Discord server, let's talk to the director of the upcoming Season 7 press tournament, Riaz Virani. Riaz Virani, welcome to Deadline.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here.
For those that may not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into diplomacy.
Sure. I'm a real estate developer. And the way that I got into diplomacy, I actually started in the late 90s. I played on a site called Redscape with a lot of play by email. And there are quite a few face-to-face players as well who played on Redscape. And over time, there were a whole bunch of tournaments that began in the Pacific Northwest for face-to-face. And I found myself very drawn to face-to-face. And as we know, we have limits on time. So as my face-to-face involvement increased, my email diplomacy time decreased. But it was a wonderful transition and an opportunity to play face-to-face with people like yourself.
Well, I certainly have enjoyed it. But as much as you are into face-to-face, we're actually here today to talk about Nexus News. So first of all, remind us what Nexus is, and then tell us how you got involved in it.
Sure. Nexus is a large community of diplomacy players who are playing using the Discord server, the Nexus Discord server. I would say it's one of the largest, if not the largest, Discord server for online diplomacy. It actually houses several forms of the game. Several forms are available, whether it's things like speedboat or gunboat. Also, there's quite a few variants that are involved and that are played on Nexus. It's global. It's a great place to play. Really good people, really nice people who you can't meet on a regular basis. Several variants are going on all the time. There are always several different tournaments. And so it's a really great place. And on a personal note, I started out because I really enjoyed Speedboat, and they have a large and active Speedboat community. And once I started out, I was really impressed with the community, really impressed with the skill of the players. They're tough players, they really challenge you. And so I started signing up for different tournaments, and here I am.
Well, speaking of here you are, I think we're here specifically to talk about some Season 7 something or other. So tell us about that.
Sure. Season 7, or the full press diplomacy tournament on Nexus, is its signature event. This is season number 7, and it's a blast. Like, it's a lot of fun. It's going to challenge anybody who plays. They're going to have a lot of fun. It's quite involved. The later rounds are more intense, and they keep building in on intensity. But for anybody who hasn't played, or anybody who has and really wants to sharpen their skills, it's a fantastic place to play diplomacy. Our tournament actually begins at the beginning of November. So we're looking at November 4th as our launch date. And that means that as of tomorrow, October 1st, we are launching registration. Registration is going to be available for a month. We play on different platforms. So whether it's Backstabber, or any other one, conspiracy, any other form of online play, it's available. So there's no restrictions on people on where they can play, and they can play towards their preference. And really, this season we've really focused on people topping boards and the importance of topping boards to secure advancement to the next round.
Well, you played in the season 6 final, so tell us a little bit about what that experience was like.
I did. It was fun, but it was intense. It was intense because of the stakes, because of how many people were watching. I mean, I'm not sure how some of your watchers may not be aware, but there's actually a group called the Diplomats, led by Ed and Stitches and Audacious Hand, who cover every season of it. And so there's people watching all the time, people commenting all the time, and within the game, you can't escape an hour without 5 or 6 different messages coming across at least, and it increases closer to deadline time. But it's a blast. It's challenging, and it requires a lot of patience and diplomatic skills that the winner certainly showed. But it's a lot of fun, and I had a great time.
Just asking a totally theoretical question. Do you think waiving builds is often a good idea or not? Just a totally theoretical question.
I think I can speak from experience that waiving builds is not the way to go. But thank you for asking. So do not play like Riaz did that year. I probably should have been more cutthroat, but you know what? I had fun, and it was just the way that I play.
Sometimes you should rub salt in a wound, and sometimes you should rub seasoned salt in the wound, and that's what I just did, and I don't apologize for it. All right, let me give you a final sort of question here. For those that might be considering signing up for season 7, but they're a little bit on the fence, give us a pitch. I mean, why should they do this?
Sure, no problem. Well, number one is some players may be VDL players or virtual diplomacy players. Some may be, strictly face-to-face. I mean, there's so many different ways to play diplomacy. But the one thing I think that you and I can agree with, I mean, as opposed to wave builds, is that playing different forms of diplomacy improves your play overall. You can only get better playing different variations and playing different players of different backgrounds. And Nexus is a great place to be able to meet with a diverse crowd, a diverse group who all play differently, whether it's the Shark or the Care Bear Alliance player or somebody in between. You're going to meet all of them. You're going to be able to play with all of them, and they're all going to challenge you in different ways. And this only sharpens your skills as a diplomacy player. Nexus itself is very, very diverse. So you get to play different people and people of high skill level. These are not beginner players. These are all veteran players for the most part who do a great job. It's a ton of fun, but it's also very challenging. And like I said, I'm a firm believer that steel sharpens steel. And Nexus is a great place to help develop your skills and sharpen your skills as well. So it's going to test you, and it's going to make you a much better player, and you're going to have a lot of fun doing it.
That is a great pitch, Riaz, for all of you watching this broadcast. Go out, sign up now, and have fun.
Absolutely. And I hope that we can count on you signing up as well, David.
How dare you put me on the spot after I just put you on the spot? We'll see. Let's put it that way. I have certainly played in Nexus tournaments before, particularly enjoyed the gunboat tournaments I have played in.
Excellent.
So I can definitely attest that Nexus is a great place to play.
Well, Nexus would be very fortunate to have you as part of the tournament.
Thanks for being on the show, Riaz.
Thank you, David. It was a pleasure.
You got it. The fall 2021 edition of our hobby's flagship publication, Diplomacy World, was released on October 2nd. In issue 155, you can check out the foreword to the dip-themed novel Art of the Stab from its author, Jamie Lunga. You can check in with variant editor Ben Durfee as he continues his quest to find the worst diplomacy variant ever. You can also check out a list of 22 military strategy tips for use in diplomacy compiled by longtime diplomacy hobbyist Lou Pulsifer. And there's much, much more in this issue 155. There's also a promotional piece about the upcoming face-to-face tournament Cascadia, which will be held in January in Vancouver, as well as articles about the upcoming DipCon at Carnage in November. A link to Diplomacy World issue 155 is included below in the description field. And now it's time for a segment we call My Favorite Things. We'll interview a diplomacy player about that person's diplomacy journey, and then we'll talk about something of particular interest to that hobbyist, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we feature Englishman Oliver Lugg, creator of what is likely the most popular dip-themed YouTube video of all time. It's called Diplomacy, the Game of Knife. Oliver, welcome to Deadline. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Hi, thanks for having me here. I am Oliver. I'm a maths student from the south of the UK. And I'm here because I run a medium-sized YouTube channel that features video essays, music, and whatever takes my fancy. And one of those video essays was on diplomacy a while ago, and I've recently created a couple of more videos about diplomacy that we'll talk about in a moment.
Yes, we will. Tell us a little bit about how you got into diplomacy.
So I think it started quite a few years ago when I was looking for info on the board game Risk online. And it led me down a rabbit hole towards finding stuff about diplomacy, which seemed interesting to me. So I suggested it as a thing I could play with my friends on someone's birthday. It may have been mine. And then we just started playing it semi-regularly on birthdays and for other events. And I gradually became more involved in online stuff as well, but I generally find I don't like playing online as much. I prefer in-person interaction. But yeah, I still play it in person, and I've even got a game planned with my friends this coming weekend.
Oh, that's good to hear. How did you get involved in your own YouTube channel, and why did you do it?
So it initially started 2012, 2013, where I put some of my music that I was making, because I produce and compose music. Obviously, it started out very primitive, because I didn't know much about making music at that time. But I gradually progressed at it and created videos featuring my music, because I wanted to share them with a wider audience. I made music for various projects along the way, various video game things, and in the course of that, I learnt how to edit videos, and so put those skills to use in creating video essay style videos, because I watched a lot of them and thought there were some things that I had things to say about, including diplomacy. Generally, I think the reason why I created a YouTube channel and why I still use it is because I just use it as a creative outlet for myself. Just something I can work on in my free time if I create anything, whether it be music, videos, or other things.
Well, speaking of things you've created, as of the time we're recording this, the Game of Knife video that people can see the graphic from here on the screen, that video has garnered over 110,000 views on YouTube. What do you think accounts for what I would call the breakaway success of that video?
Well, I think there were a few stages to it. It started out when I first released this video. It caught the eye of Chris Martin, who's the former Diplomacy World Champion, who left a comment on it along with Andrew Goff. So it was quite surreal to get two Diplomacy World Champions commenting on my videos straight away. And Chris Martin shared it around the Diplomacy community. It gained a fair bit of traction in the Diplomacy community, but it was still, only a couple of thousand views at that point. And then in January of this year, the video I made about the game 5D Chess with Multiverse Time Travel, which I think we'll get to later, kind of exploded when the YouTube algorithm decided it just wanted to show people that video. And as a result, it showed more people my diplomacy video as well. And over 100,000 of them subsequently went on to watch it.
Even if it's a roundabout story like that, we love the fact that 110,000 people plus have watched your diplomacy video. That's amazing.
Yes, I'm quite proud of it and happy that I've introduced so many more people to diplomacy. It's
true, and it is a spectacularly entertaining video. I mean, I've probably watched it 4 times at this point. It's just a lot of fun to watch. You recently created another video about diplomacy in which you debut your version of 5D diplomacy. Now, this harkens back to the video you were talking about that you did about 5D chess and the multiverse. So tell us a little bit about this project, if you would.
Yeah, so it started really with people leaving comments on one or other of the videos. That people who had watched both the diplomacy and 5D chess videos making a joke like, haha, maybe he'll make a 5D diplomacy video next. And, I never expected, okay, I'm actually going to do that. I just, thought, kind of a funny joke. But this summer I was working a temp summer job that was really quite tedious. And so it gave, I was just doing the same repetitive actions over and over again. And so my mind was left to wander quite a bit. And just for fun, really, I wondered, what would it take to actually create 5D diplomacy with multiverse time travel? So as I was working, I kind of came up with the idea in my head, worked through a couple of the design problems. And then when I finished my job this summer, I decided I'd try coding it in a very quick manner, kind of like a hackathon. And what I came up with was a simplified diplomacy board with only 3 regions, but where the history of each move is saved, and you can send armies back in time to previous moves to split off new timelines, which is a combination of the diplomacy mechanics and the 5D chess mechanics of creating new timelines via time travel. I'm decently happy with the final result. I think I'm impressed with myself that I managed to make it at all. But it's pretty buggy, and the code is very horrible because I did write it so quickly. And I wanted, from the start, I knew I only wanted a prototype. I didn't want to make anything more involved. But surprisingly, some other people have been interested in expanding it. So suddenly I'm feeling quite bad about the terrible quality of the code that they may have to work with.
Hey, everybody who has done any kind of breakthrough in cultural history has had it built upon by others. There's nothing wrong with the fact that it was first a little rough, in addition to the fact that nobody had ever done it before. You were in uncharted waters here.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I had the 5D chess mechanics to work with, and I had the diplomacy mechanics to work with, and I found what I thought to be the most sensible combination of the two. I've since learned that other people have different opinions on what may be better ways of doing certain things within this game. But I'm all for encouraging discussion on that and encouraging people to work on it if they wish to.
It is shocking to me that people have different opinions within the world of diplomacy about any particular subject. That is shocking. Which is the same way it would be shocking to me if there are people in the back playing cards. It'd be shocking. So if one was a visitor or wanted to be a visitor to your YouTube channel, what else would they run across these days in terms of browsing your video offerings?
So my most popular videos are the video essay styles. I make them on video games, board games, films, books. Obviously 5D chess has become by far the most popular, followed by diplomacy. But it's not just video essays I make. As I said, I use my YouTube channel as just somewhere where I can put my stuff that I create creatively. So it's got lots of my music on. from the several years I spent developing my musical skills. And there's also other content that I just create from time to time. Some of it is diplomacy related. For instance, I participated in Media Wars 2 earlier this year and created my retrospective. And then I've also got other random videos, and will continue to make other random videos into the future, just depending on what I want to make on a whim.
You know, this segment that you're appearing on, we call My Favorite Things. Would you say that your favorite part of this channel is the music? And if so, tell us a little bit more about your musical style.
I don't know whether I call it my favorite, but it's certainly an underappreciated part of it compared to my videos, which is fine. People have different interests. I tend to create kind of electronic or ambient style music because I have worked on several game soundtracks now. But I like to branch out and look for variety in the stuff that I make.
Fair enough. Well, let's bring this back to diplomacy just a minute before we close. What about the game of diplomacy sort of brings you back or keeps you interested?
I really like the multiple layers that it has, and this was a method I structured, a method I used to structure my game of my knife video. So it's kind of got the methodical, mathematical layer of just moving pieces around and creating the orders and resolving the orders, because there are algorithms to do that. And then it's got the personal, psychological level of trying to trick people or work with people. And then there's kind of the meta literary level of it, even, where you're talking about things, because it is set in the real world, in Europe, World War One. It's interesting in that regard, because you are playing as these countries.
It's really true. Well, Oliver Lugg, any final thoughts for our diplomacy audience about the game of knife, or the meaning of life, or how to avoid strife, or anything else you want to say?
Well, for how to avoid strife, I would say don't play diplomacy, probably. Yeah. But otherwise, I don't know. I think I made all the points I wanted to in my various videos, so I don't have much more to say on that.
All right, buddy. Well, thanks for being on the show, and thanks for producing this really entertaining and, I would say, influential video in the promotion of diplomacy to the world.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been good to be here and to explain some of my thoughts.
You got it. Let's move now to our panel discussion about cliques in diplomacy. We all know that this game is about building and sometimes breaking relationships with other players on the board. Inevitably, the past history of one's interactions with fellow players, or lack thereof, plays some role in the negotiation aspect of any individual game. On the other hand, basing decisions upon which alliance to pursue or which moves to make, based largely on relationships, conflicts, or agreements from outside the context of that particular game, is often described as either metagaming or cross-gaming, and is generally frowned upon, at least to some degree, by many hobbyists. A long-standing positive relationship with one or more players over multiple games can be particularly tricky. Is that a clique, which many find abhorrent, or is that just the outcome of sensibly using past data to predict and formulate future actions? Let's discuss this whole issue with experienced diplomacy players Craig Mayer of Montana, Ben Kelman of Michigan, and Texan Ed Sullivan. Welcome to the show, guys. Ed Sullivan, tell us briefly about yourself and how you got into playing diplomacy, if you would.
Oh, sure, David. I'm a lawyer in Houston, Texas. I'm 50 years old, and I got into the hobby in college. I played one face-to-face game. It's actually the only face-to-face game I've ever played. So that was 30 years ago. And then when I got into law school in my mid-20s, I started playing diplomacy on Usenet, which is before you really had good web browsers. So there was a place called rec.games.diplomacy. I played there for a while, took a 25-year break, and got back on playing about 3 years ago.
That's great. We're glad to have you. Ben, same question.
Sure, David. I think I have a lot of a story that a lot of people have in diplomacy, where I was taught by a school teacher when I was in middle school. here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I learned the game. I always tried to get games together with friends throughout high school, but probably only ended up playing 5 or 6 times because, how do you get 7 high schoolers to sit around all day, especially once they get eliminated, people start getting antsy. Came back to the game in 2018 very briefly, and then came back to it in a more full force during the pandemic when we all sort of needed a hobby that was not in person, and have been playing a lot of diplomacy since then.
Yeah, we really have. How about you, Craig Mayer?
I grew up in a little tiny town in Wisconsin, and our little free library every Saturday had board games, and my siblings and I would go play board games, and there was always a group that was playing diplomacy, and every once in a while they needed a 7th, and they'd let me play Austria for about 2 years, and then I would go and play other games after they eliminated me. So that was my first introduction, and then I hadn't played it in a long time and kind of picked it back up first online with web diplomacy and play diplomacy, and then got heavily into the in-person face-to-face traveling community, and have just been hooked ever since. That was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I've been playing in a lot of face-to-face tournaments since then.
I was going to start with that, Craig. Because of a sort of a long-standing experience you've had in the face-to-face world, you might have a particular perspective on this. Do you think that cliques have been a problem in face-to-face play? This idea of some players preferring to work with certain other players over a series of games or within a tournament setting?
In the face-to-face community, I think just human nature being what it is, there are people that you prefer to interact with and prefer to work with. But in my experience in the face-to-face, there hasn't been a consistent, like, these groups of people will somehow form some kind of a cabal to manufacture good results for each other during tournaments, or basically during tournaments. So while I think cliques exist, I'm just not sure that there's a quote unquote problem that really affects outcomes of tournaments.
Okay. Well, Ben, let me turn to you. Playing a lot of virtual in the last year and a half, have you experienced a problem with cliques in the virtual play?
Well, as Craig said, it's difficult to identify when it's a problem and when it's not. But I definitely think that, well, to start, diplomacy is a game of trust, right? And you build that trust over the course of a game. But if trust has been built over many games and many interactions off board, I do think there's a tendency of people to end up working together more frequently, right? Now, I don't think any of us would consider that a problem. The problem comes when it becomes when deals are made between games, right? Or when people start to decide things not based on board conditions, based on who they want to see go into other finish in different places. It's tricky. I do think there's been a lot of building of really strong friendships over the course of the pandemic through the virtual interaction on board and off board, and that can be difficult to work against somebody who you have that good relationship with. So I don't know if I'd say it rises to the level of a problem, but I do think there's more. I would anticipate, having not participated in the face-to-face hobby, that comes into play more virtually than it probably does in face-to-face.
I was going to say, in my experience as a long-time face-to-face, as you know, I've been playing it for decades. A lot of my best friends are people that we stab each other constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that a long-standing deep friendship would lead to what I would consider to be improper cross-gaming type stuff does seem alien to me. Ed, let me turn to you, given your experience online. Obviously, you've had a lot of virtual experience as well, so I want to hear about that. But is cliquey play a problem in your experience, either the stuff you've done online and or the virtual games?
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem, but it exists online. I should say I'm not an expert on every online outlet for diplomacy. I basically made my nest at Nexus, and Nexus has cliques, right? They've got a group called the Hearts. They've got there's a group sort of scurrilously called the Italian Meta Mafia with all the Italians who run Nexus. But overall, it's not a huge problem on Nexus because player participation is so vast. In other words, there's so many people playing that if there's just groups of friendships between one or two, it's unlikely to affect any game significantly. But online, like say the Nexus main event tournaments or any of the tournaments, there's metagaming that occurs, and it's a bit like whack-a-mole for the tournament directors. There's always an attempt to make rules for the next season that would eliminate the problems of the past, but it's a game where people are trying to take an advantage and use manipulation to do so in many cases, and everyone's going to use every advantage they have. So it's never going to be knocked out completely, but I'm fairly confident it doesn't exist to a significant degree online.
What about in virtual space? Or have you seen Clique play that you think is a real downside for?
Yeah, no, it's for the opposite reason. Like I think I mentioned it in one of my Second Fiddle articles this year, or Under the Bus, or whatever the diplomacy briefing calls it these days, which is the player pool is shrinking for virtual for whatever reason. Maybe we're getting healthier, the pandemic, I don't know why, but the same sort of hardcore people are playing frequently. And I feel bad because people are requesting favors based on metagaming principles and games that you did them in a favor for in the past, or they did you a favor. It's time to return the favor cross game. And a lot of that may be just because they're newer players, right? So they feel like that's appropriate. Maybe in their mind it's fine, but it really gives me a bad feeling because I want nothing more than as many people as possible to experience the great game of diplomacy. And you got to have a fighting chance when you enter the game, in my mind. When you get to Spring 1901, the table's got to be even for everyone, and your negotiating skill should be what causes you to succeed or fail, not because there's a favor owed from a prior game or there's something else going on. So I think it's a real issue in virtual right now. I don't have a solution for it except to encourage everyone who plays virtually to remember that they were new players probably within the last year or two.
Craig, let me turn to you, following up on what Ed just said. Do you think in your experience that this concept of cross gaming or realizing that we have personal interactions with people over a long series of games, is that necessarily a negative thing, or is that something that's just to be expected, given the fact that we're talking about player interaction over a series of games?
There's a lot of talk. Well, so first of all, we're not a large community, right? There's not thousands of people playing this game. So you're going to play the same people kind of over and over and over in games. In fact, amongst tournament directors, there's a ton of incentive to get new people to come to your tournaments so that you're not playing with Jason Massbaum again. But could you repeat the question?
Well, let me follow up on it. So is this really a negative issue exclusively, or is there some of this that's not really negative? It's more just a consequence of having personal interactions.
I don't see it as a negative. In fact, one could argue it's a leverage point that you could use to gain an advantage over someone. If you can even over years establish a system of trust with someone, and you can use that to your advantage in a particularly important game. Say you're a couple points away from winning that tournament and you're a good friend and you are working together, and that might be the time to use that trust or betray that trust to your advantage. So there's always an advantage to be had for what the topic we're talking about, which is, like Ben said, building trust amongst people that you don't have any obligation to continue with. So I think it's an advantage. That's a feature, not a bug.
All right. Well, Ben, we've got Ed saying that it is a bug of sorts. We've got Craig saying it's not necessarily a bug. It might be just a feature of the interaction. What do you think the ramifications of this topic might be in virtual diplomacy league play, for example, or virtual tournaments that you've been participating in?
I think it absolutely goes both ways. I absolutely see what Craig is saying about saving up trust, building up trust, and then using it however you want in a critical moment. One of the really difficult things for me is that I like to think of diplomacy as a competitive game. One of the things I like about games is that there's specific rules. You play within the rules and you try to do better within that framework than somebody else could, right? Once we start talking about this stuff, we're playing outside of the rules of the game of diplomacy. But I don't know that that's necessarily a problem either. We're just playing this sort of broader game of diplomacy. The tricky thing is that then you have to start thinking about all your interactions with the people that you're playing with, right? And how those are going to build into your relationships. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I would rather have the play be on the board, but it can be difficult to address that, aside from exactly as Ed was saying and Craig was saying, addressing the player pool and just bringing in more and more people. In terms of the Virtual Diplomacy League, I do think it feeds into this a little bit more because it is a lot of the same people playing over and over, and that there's a top board everyone's sort of shaping as the year goes, and sometimes they can be shaped consciously. But the really good thing about the Virtual Diplomacy League is that it's extremely accessible. There's games at all different time zones every month. Everyone who's watching this, if you haven't played, you should come play. And it is a really enjoyable environment. So I hope just through growth, we can get away from some of this.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ed. Go ahead.
So we're all competitors in the game, but we're all ambassadors of the hobby. This is the precise reason that I was reticent to go to face-to-face events before the pandemic, because I thought it would just be sort of a cabal of friends and I would just get eliminated, and I didn't want to sink the cost of travel time and all the rest of it. And I've really learned, at least from things like what you've said, David and Craig, that no, that's really not the way it works when you go to these events. In fact, you might have an advantage because people are excited to see new faces, but that's and I'm proud to say I'm going to, Carnage in November, but that's a danger. You don't want people to enter a game thinking they don't have a chance.
Well, because if they don't, they're not going to enter the game, as you point out. I mean, it's one thing for us sharks in the league or whatever to be trying to shape the top board, and I'm not against that. I totally agree with Ben on that. But the downside is we need some people that are coming as baby sharks, and we need them to come. We need to feed them. We need to grow them. And it's hard to do that. And there have always been players in the face-to-face hobby who don't work with new players, and there have been some that do. It's a dividing line. Chris Martin was famously known as the newbie whisperer because he was really good at working with newer players. Some people actually don't have much patience for that. Craig, what do you think?
Well, I was saying I can empathize with the frustration and pain of being at a board and thinking, I have no agency here. There is nothing I can do. These three people have just decided to work against me and they will eliminate me, and there's nothing I can do. I feel that. But I just think it oversimplifies the game to think that this is going on, because the game is incredibly complex with human interaction. You always have agency. You can always use some sort of leverage to try to improve your position. Now, it's not always going to work, but I think that the game is so complicated that there is no problem within the game that is systematic and is unredeemable, and there's no mitigation to it. I just don't believe that.
I'll agree with that. Even when you enter a game, even if people enter a game planning to work together, you never know what's going to happen in the game of diplomacy, right? And things swing for all different reasons. Craig and I were in a game earlier this year that swung at the end just because of tensions on the board. Had nothing to do with Cliques, I don't think. So it can happen in all kinds of ways.
So I agree with what Craig and Ben say on that, right? Which is, we've all been ganged up on. It's not fun, but it's part of diplomacy. But yes, there are cliques. Yes, it's not great, but also you can improve as a player learning to deal with cliques. The way I personally deal with cliques, and when I face them, is I go back to, a quote of one of my favorite politicians, which is, sometimes party loyalty demands too much. And anytime there's a group of people working together, someone's on the short end of the stick, and there's always a way to leverage that against the people who are getting the better end of the stick. But just, you can't think you're out of it. Even if you really are out of it, that mindset will never do you well in diplomacy.
Well, I'm going to give you, Ed, a final chance here to say anything else you want to say about the problem, or what we can do about it, or what individual players ought to do about it beyond what you've already said.
So I don't have a great tactical game, as Craig and Ben are well aware, but I think I have a pretty good social game and negotiation game. And the first thing I do when I talk to any player, and Ben, you remember this when we first talked, is I don't talk about the game or what I want to do. I ask those people about them, their lives, and what they do. And I try to build a relationship with them that can work inside and outside the game. And I think if we all approached newer players that way and newer players felt welcome, that we could expand the pool and spread the game and give everyone a better time. And I think that's the way to go, personally.
Ben, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think we've covered a lot of the important aspects of this. I'll just say diplomacy, diplomacy is a game. Diplomacy leagues are a slightly different game, or tournaments, but just play to win the game. That's what's, to quote the great or moderately great Herm Edwards, you come into a game, you play to win the game. That's what's fun about it. And that's what I enjoy playing about diplomacy.
All right, Craig, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. I think we've covered this topic pretty well. I want to talk about Carnage just a second as we end this panel discussion, because all four of us, I think, are going to be at Carnage in Vermont, November 5th through 7th. It'll be Ed and Ben's first. Ben, is this right? That's your first face-to-face tournament?
No, I played. I was at WDC in 2018. Didn't go well. This will be my first face-to-face tournament since I feel like a competent player. How about that?
All right, fair enough. So the first, hopefully positive face-to-face experience for both of these guys. All right, I got a fever. I got a face-to-face fever, and the only prescription is not more cowbell. It is what, Craig? What's the prescription for these guys?
You mean specifically face-to-face?
Yes.
Yep.
Somebody who knows the game pretty well, but has not played a lot of face-to-face. What's the
Belgium?
It is, well, first of all, it's just a different environment, right? You're with people. You can see them, you can hear them, you can smell them a lot. And that is just completely different than sitting in your home, putting your orders in while you're looking at somebody trying to talk to you. You've got people pulling you away from the table, sometimes physically. You've got a pad that you're writing orders down. So you just have to be ready for, and I think the main thing is time management. Make sure that you are prioritizing getting your orders in, getting the stuff written correctly, because you're writing it by hand. You're not typing it into a computer. It's a lot more attention to some of the details that maybe a virtual face-to-face isn't going to give you. And then just, you need to be a little bit of a duck's back. There are things that are going to annoy you, and you have to let those things go, because people are annoying when they're up in your face and you're doing better than they are and they want to do better. You have to be able to manage that and deal with the annoyance and get done what you want to get done, and make sure your orders are written right and make sure they're in there by the end of the clock. We don't have a grace period for the most part in face-to-face. So, and no one's going to come in and go, oh, I had a computer problem with my pad, I couldn't write. No, that's not going to fly. You got to get your stuff done. Got to get done on time. And on top of it, you've got to have good social interactions, and you have to have good strategy and good tactics. It's a lot in face-to-face. And it's much better than I'm making it sound. It really is fun.
It's a lot, but it's awesome. Guys, Thanks for being on the show, and I look forward to seeing you in November.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
And thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using David Hood at dixiecon.com. For our other broadcast offerings, visit our website at diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss, and of course, Belgium.